It is said, wars have always existed, therefore they will always exist. Such empirical prophecies are, in form, utterly fallacious. Their substantial truth, if they are true, hangs on the assumption, which may be true or false, that the same nature, cosmic and human, is at work in all ages. We may safely say, all former men have died, therefore all future men will die too, because all future men will be animals, bred out of a seed and endowed organically for reproduction, not for immortality. Any other sort of being would not be a man. Our inference is justified, not empirically, but by the nature that we find proper to mankind. If, on the other hand, anyone had said, in antiquity, parents have always sacrificed their firstborn, therefore they will always do so, that prophet would have been mistaken. That which caused parents to sacrifice their firstborn was not an integral part of the mechanism of reproduction. It was not involved in fatherhood as death is involved in animal life. Mankind could accordingly survive, and survive better, without that sacrifice. Empirical science is valid only when it is a method of observing and testing the constitution of nature. It is utterly worthless or positively superstitious when it connects surface appearances directly, because appearances do not depend on one another, and their sequences are never, in fact, exactly repeated. The question therefore is, has there always been war in the world because war is involved in the nature of men and in their inevitable relations? Or is war due to some adventitious circumstance, to some falsely stimulated passion, similar to the superstitious fear that led primitive man to imagine that by sacrificing the firstborn, the whole tribe might be saved? I reply, endless conflict, arrested at some temporary equilibrium, is essential to all forces meeting in the same field. Either the forces are not distinguished, and there are no units of which we can trace the history, or the equilibrium, which always existed in nature, is only a pause between two blows and between two battles. In this sense, Heraclitus said the last and the first word. War is the parent of all things. It is also the destroyer of all things, because physical things are unstable by nature, and ironically sustained by a balance of power essentially hostile to their specific being. But there are endless eddies and backwaters and meanderings in this treacherous flux. Often the alternative forces are unconscious, and the issue placid. There is no regret for what is excluded, because it was never desired or conceived, and all life seems to flow for a while unanimously in the victorious direction. The old historians were right, and history is a tale of wars, but the modern historians are right too, because in the midst of those wars, and behind the firing line, the arts of peace are able to flourish. Spiritual things, too, in which the moralist is ultimately interested, escape, in their own sphere, the curse of competition and of living by one another's death. It is only in respect to the material organs that they are rivals. And the more the mind is emancipated from concern for the body, the less it suffers, unless it fears the encroachment of foreign things, because to pure intellect, nothing is foreign. But this escape from war is upward, an intellectual dimension, into an impalpable world. The question for politics is rather this: need the forces that decide the course of history take the form of armies advancing to capture or to destroy one another? And to this question the answer is surely no, because the decision can be made more directly, antecedently, and perhaps insensibly by the very forces that would secure victory in war, if war broke out. Why fight if the issue of the conflict can be foreseen, and the conditions of peace can be imposed and accepted beforehand, without the convulsed attempt at mutual destruction? The wisdom and the fatigue that accept peace at the end might, with a little more reasonableness, accept peace at the beginning. What prevents is only ignorance, rage, and frivolity, and these passions may be, and are, modified in governments, and even in peoples, on certain occasions. When numbers, wealth, energy, and discipline are all on one side, resistance would seem unreasonable, and yet it is often in such desperate cases that war is waged most stubbornly and heroically, because beneath and beyond all rational considerations there is the instinct of the hunted animal to flee, and if possible to turn and to die fighting. Reason can never persuade anybody to change his nature, and the mere prospect of death, however certain, never prevents life from going on automatically to the last gasp. There are irreconcilables, and even if the more organized groups of them are exterminated by the ruling powers, a sprinkling or margin of irreconcilables will always spring up like weeds in the garden. They will be called criminals or heretics, and they will continue to carry on a desperate private war against society. Nevertheless, since these domestic rebels are outlaws, and in theory are to be eliminated, the force engaged in suppressing them is the police rather than the army, and the perennial conflict of society with them is not called war. One way in which war might be abolished would be this: that all armies should exercise only the function of police, universal government having established for all nations laws which it would be able to enforce. Wars fought in the dark between governments both hoping for victory are gambles, and they enlist the same passions as gambling for money. There is not only avarice, or more probably, debt and destitution, but even more prominently, there is love of excitement, faith in one's luck, and eagerness to try a system said to work miracles. Such war is barbarous, not only for being cruel and wrathful, but for being hysterical. The herd instinct of work produces frenzy in individuals otherwise sane. There is a rush of 1,000 hearts in a vague cause, simply because it has become the common cause. Here is an occasion for the wise ruler to prove his skill. Nature has given him a pliant instrument. All are ready to fight and die for the common cause, and nobody knows what the common cause is. He can define that cause as he pleases. He can decide what shall be the common purpose for which his unanimous people will take the field. If he does not decide, or does so foolishly, very probably his unanimous people will take the field for nothing. In divining some notable advantage that might result from this blind conflict, and setting up that possibility as the object to attain, he not only rationalizes an irrational movement, but trains the people to set their hearts on a public good, because nothing endears itself so much to us as that for which we are making unreasonable sacrifices. In this way, the eloquence of leaders, grafted on practical commitments and automatic emotions in the people, can fix ideals like national independence or glory, for which nations may be ready to wage enthusiastic wars so long as nations exist, and very often they exist as nations only by virtue of those superimposed unnecessary interests. Did official eloquence and military discipline leave modern nations alone for a moment, they might break up into local units or be merged in larger empires without any material inconvenience, and perhaps with advantage to the intensity and fruitfulness of their domestic cultures. The blind wars waged by nations out of national rivalry are therefore easily preventable, in so far as the nations themselves are artificial units. If the organization which makes them units and enables them to fight one another were destroyed, wars of that character and on that scale would be rendered impossible. In the end, however, we come to the natural units, economic or moral. Moral units are groups of similar minds, speaking the same language, having the same religion and arts, and stimulating by social sympathy and applause the genius native to their members. Economic units, on the contrary, are formed by the interdependence of dissimilar arts. They extend as far as do economic exchanges. They are unconscious systems of cooperation, like that which makes insects contribute to the reproduction of flowers. Moral units, if they could be purely moral, would not be bellicose, because no injury and no real diminution of dignity is caused to one spiritual good by the mere existence of other spiritual goods. But in this world, nothing is merely moral. Moral realities must have a physical basis, and through their physical basis, they must become competitive. The existence of a different language or religion just beyond the frontier, or even in the bosom of one's own household, then becomes a danger and an offense. Moral units appeal to the secular arm, and we have wars perhaps begun in self-defense, but often carried on by fanaticism. It is the most legitimate self-defense to resist interference with one's moral traditions, but it is fanaticism to desire that there should nowhere exist any moral traditions but one's own. Between this self-defense or love of vital liberty and this fanaticism, the hearts of heroes and apostles are divided. There is, in almost all, I think, some admixture of both elements. Economic units also wage frequent wars, sometimes intelligently, but more often and more largely with a suicidal blindness. When economic units are simple and closed, as in some agricultural island, with only home manufacturers and no foreign commerce, there is no occasion for war, since there are no enemies, and to break up the world again into such isolated units would be a means of securing peace between them, even when commercial relations are more complicated. Economic systems may exist side by side without conflicting if they cover separate fields. But fields in this world are not easily separable. There will be rivalry for colonies and ports and raw materials and markets, and there will be occasional piracy and pillage, turning that rivalry into aggression. But the ensuing war will probably not very much enrich the victor in ruining the vanquished, because the threads of industrial interconnection are many and largely invisible. And any important local breakage will derange the whole world of commerce. In so complex a matter, no one is sure of his diagnosis, and it will rather be some non-economic motive that will inspire even one's economic policy. Often, the units called economic, like labor or the proletariat, are not really economic, but moral units. They are composed of similar persons, not of interdependent activities. A war of one social class against all others may be successful in destroying the enemy classes. The social types detested by the fanatic who will have only his own social type in the world. But that moral victory will not enrich the surviving class economically. On the contrary, unless variety of moral types and of ways of living is somehow reintroduced, the qualitative riches of the community will be terribly diminished and reduced to the lowest common denominator. The principle being that no one shall enjoy anything that everybody may not enjoy with him. I think that clear intelligence, if armed with sufficient authority, could easily avoid wars for economic motives. Population could be controlled by indirect methods, financial, educational, and production could be organized internationally so that all nations would be interested in keeping the peace. But probably this economic interest would be insufficient to curb other ambitions, and war could not be effectively repressed save by a central, universal government, self-inspired and autocratic. always ready to wage it with overwhelming force.